good day to all UWE Open Campus graduate students. Today we are talking with Dr. Sandra Gift, who is a Senior Program Officer for Quality Assurance in the St. Augustine campus of the University of the West Indies. And our topic today is quality assurance. So welcome, Dr. Gift.
Thank you very much.
And thanks for accepting our invitation to talk about this issue, which I think is having a very big impact on teaching and learning in higher education as a whole. Now, over the last 2 or 3 decades, tertiary and higher education institutions have begun highlighting this issue of quality and ensuring that a lot of attention is paid to quality in terms of teaching and learning. What caused this, increased interest in quality in teaching and learning at higher education institutions?
Well, I think the quality movement, while there was this interest, it didn't begin in higher education. The quality movement really started in industry. At a time when there was a concern to ensure that products met certain specifications that were predetermined, and that there was a concern to satisfy customers and to ensure that customers got value for money. That was in the industrial setting. And there were some theorists, some quality theorists who were active at the time in the United States and were developing these notions around quality control, for example. The idea, and you hear the term quality control now even used in higher education, but it's not really the appropriate concept of quality for education. Because the idea behind quality control is looking for defects in a product, for example, so that in an industrial setting, and in particular when there was a massification of production in terms of goods, in particular the manufacturing goods, the concern was to ensure that the goods on the assembly line, by the time the assembly line process was completed, that they were free of defects. And therefore, it meant that they had to devise systems to ensure that there was an inspection of a finished good to ensure that it was as perfect as possible. And that's how the notion of quality control came about. But the focus in quality control was at the end of the event. And therefore, it's a very different notion of quality to the one that we want to see in an educational setting, which is certainly, we're not looking at a student to see what defects a student may have, really. And so in the industrial setting, that was a notion. And it really, I think the success of that approach to quality was realized in Japan, when Edward Deming was invited to Japan to, as part of their reconstruction process, to implement his quality ideas. And it was a great success there. And then in the United States, it caught on. And it was really from the 1990s that the whole notion of quality assurance and quality improvement took hold in the educational setting, and in particular in higher education.
So in terms of higher education then, given this, as you put it, this startup in industry with the quality control idea, how then is quality viewed in an education setting then? In other words then, what is quality from an education point of view?
Well, okay, to answer what is quality from an educational, that too is a very complex kind of thing to pin down. What is quality in an educational setting? In the higher education setting, the concept of quality that is utilized is referred to as fitness for purpose. And it's not just fitness for purpose, but at least possible cost to the society. Fitness for purpose essentially means that when an educational establishment says to its stakeholders, that is the parents and teachers and students, that these are our aims and our objectives, here is what, if you come here, this is what you will get here, these are the programs that you will be able to benefit by, these are the learning outcomes that we will see realized in you. when you put forward your mission, your aims and objectives as an educational establishment, fitness for purpose means that you're going to be assessed or evaluated to determine whether you are doing what you say you are doing, and therefore whether your establishment is fit for the purpose that has been identified by you for it. And therefore, it means then, in the context of higher education, evaluators will be asked to take an objective eye and assess the extent to which your goals are being realized, the curriculum is what you said it would be, that the learning objectives are actually documented, that they're clear, that they're transparent to everyone, that assessment is being conducted along the lines that you indicated to the students it would be, that the resources that you said that you have do exist, and they are the kind of standard and quality that you said you do have them, and that you do have in place systems and procedures to monitor quality across the board. Now, this notion of systems and procedures is very, very important, because these are the objective measures which are then utilized by evaluators to assess the extent to which you are really fit for purpose, that you have systems in place to monitor, for example, that you to get student feedback and to act on that student feedback.
Now, does this then have anything to do then with the culture of quality? People talk about, you know, having a culture of quality to ensure that the things that you are talking about take place. Does this have anything to do with ensuring a culture of quality?
Yeah, well, again, yes, it does. And I would also say that a culture of quality is also something that will vary from institution to institution. Because even the approach to quality can be seen through the lens of a particular cultural lens. I think we will all understand that each educational institution has its own organizational climate or culture. It has its own mission. It has its own objectives. And if we take, for example, so that varies from institution to institution. So the culture is one thing that will vary across institutions. When we speak about a culture of quality, we're talking about two components which make up a culture of quality. One is psychological. One is that we agree as a collective community in any given institution on our values. What are our values? What are our beliefs? What are our objectives? Do we have a shared commitment to quality in terms of aiming for excellence? So that's one dimension, the psychological. And in any institution, that psychological climate will be different from institution to institution. But then, in terms of monitoring what you're doing, you want to be sure that you have systems and procedures that relate to the operations. So there are two aspects to the culture of quality then, the psychological, and the other we could call the managerial or the structural. And those two together will help you to build a culture of quality. So the culture of quality is not really an end product per se. It is a framework that will then allow you to assess, as an institution, who are we? What are our objectives? Where are we going? What is important to us in terms of your mission and everything else? So the culture of quality you can take as, again, a framework that allows you to achieve what you have set out to achieve as an educational establishment.
Thank you for that. Just one thing before we close this particular segment. The next segment, we will go on to talk a little bit more about what happens in terms of quality assurance. But just to make sure that we don't mix up our terms, you started off by saying that quality control belonged primarily to industry. So in a sense, one should not use that term in an education setting?
No, I would suggest that we do not use that term in an educational setting, because what is really important in the educational setting is a transformation dimension of quality, which we didn't have time to discuss in the earlier definitions and so forth. But so that's another concept of quality, to empower a learner, to enhance a learner, and therefore to transform that learner as a result of all the learning environment that the learner will be exposed to. So the transformative concept of quality is taking the fitness for purpose concept a little further. It's not just saying you have to comply in terms of showing you have procedures and systems to do what you do, but you're concerned with adding, with improving. You're concerned with a process that makes the learning environment better and that therefore adds value to the student and to the community in which that student is located.
Okay, we will take up that transformational, I like the word, that transformational aspect of it when we come back in our second segment.
Okay,
Thank you.
Sure.
When we ended, the last segment, you were talking about the transformational dimension of quality. I thought it was an interesting point, and I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about that before we get into this part of the interview.
Right. The fitness for purpose concept, while it does address aims and objectives of a program that also imply demonstrating the relevance of the program, implicitly it requires demonstrating that the institution or program has complied with systems and procedures expected to be in place in a higher education institution. The transformative dimension of the concept of quality addresses the softer elements. So you want to be able to demonstrate, for example, that you do have systems and procedures in place, but in terms of customer care, in terms of student-centeredness, in terms of what they call the softer dimensions of quality assurance, that demonstrate that you have at the heart of quality a concern for students, not just the systems, but the actual experience, and therefore that the whole experience that the students will have at your institution is one that will really empower them, him or her, that will enhance the student, and not just the student, but as a result of having graduated from your institution, the skills, the attributes, the values and belief systems that the student will have will also transform the society in which the student will be located.
Thank you for that. I think that's important. Now, you are the Quality Assurance Officer of the St. Augustine campus of the University of the West Indies, and you have to carry out quality assurance exercise with the various departments, teaching programs, and so on. Could you say what is involved in a quality assurance exercise?
Yes, certainly. Well, first of all, the Quality Assurance Unit is actually located within the Vice Chancellery. So it's a center office, and I am physically located here, but I don't belong to the campus. I belong to the university center. And I guess that's important because it demonstrates the commitment of the university to quality assurance at a regional level. Now, when a program is being reviewed, one of the first things that we do, what I would do, I would go into the department or the unit concerned and conduct an orientation session with the staff so that they fully understand the concept of quality, the approach to quality assurance at UWI, and that in particular it is not meant to be an exercise that is judgmental or punitive in terms of staff and how staff relate to it or how we relate to staff. It is not intended to be used for promotion or to influence any human resource management issues where they are personally concerned. It is meant to be a developmental exercise, and the approach is very, very collegial. So first of all, that contextualizing of the ethos of the whole thing is important, and then I would introduce to them the various concepts of quality that exist, and the one that we use at UWI, Fitness for Purpose. And we have documentation that we provide that provides guidelines for the development of a self-study report. So in essence, the review begins with the department or the program reviewing itself first.
That's a self-study report.
The self-study report. It allows them, therefore, it forces them, in a sense, to take the time to slow down a bit and to become very self-reflective and even self-critical in terms of what they do in terms of teaching and learning. That self-study report needs a minimum of about 6 months to be done well. So normally the orientation sessions will be conducted as far as possible a year in advance of the scheduled date for the review. And we have a cycle of every 5 to 7 years a program comes up for review. Unfortunately, because of resources, sometimes the cycle is a bit longer than that, and because of the demands as well on the office. Having done the we also asked the academic staff to recommend the persons they consider best suited to review them. And the structure of the team, of the review team, is important. We invite, as a team leader, a senior academic from a university outside of the Caribbean, on whom we rely to be independent in his or her thinking, and as well to be objective. And that person leads the team. Now, in order to ensure that all the deliberations of the reviewers are relevant as well, and that they're contextually based, we also invite a senior academic from another UWI campus to be on the review team in the same discipline, as well as a professional from the country, as far as possible, in the area. So it's a 3-member team. They make the next phase, having set up the review team, we organize a site visit. So
is there any relationship between the self-study report that the members of the particular department would have done and the work that the specially selected review team would do 6 months down the road?
Certainly. That self-assessment report is sent to the review team. So when they make their site visit, they already have that self-assessment report in hand. And the job of the review team is to what we call validate the contents of that report, to conduct interviews with academic staff themselves, with students most importantly, with the administrators, and even with professionals in the field to determine whether or not the program is fit for purpose and to validate that what they have said in their self-assessment report can stand up to scrutiny. So there's a triangulation of data from various sources on the basis of which now the review team does its own report assessing the fitness for purpose of the program, identifying strengths and weaknesses, and making recommendations for continuing improvement.
So it seems as though it is a continuous cycle.
It is.
When the review team makes its report, well, that goes back to the department. Is there any monitoring of the department in terms of carrying out? Well, before I get to that, suppose the department doesn't agree.
Okay, exactly. And so we say to the department, they're not obliged to accept the recommendations. However, they must consider the recommendations, and the ones that they accept, we ask that they implement the recommendations. And there is a monitoring committee, the Academic Quality Assurance Committee, certainly at St. Augustine. It's chaired by the deputy principal. And within 1 year of having received the report of the review team, the head of the department of the program or the unit must write to the deputy principal and send a report indicating what action has been taken or is in the process of being taken with regard to the recommendations that they have accepted. Where they have not accepted the recommendations, they are required also to give reasons. So that report is sent, in addition to which the head of the department and the unit coordinator, as the case might be, they are both invited to make an oral presentation to AQUAC, the Academic Quality Assurance Committee, going into the details of the implementation of the recommendations or the non-implementation, as the case might be. And it is at that point that the cycle of the review process itself is considered to be closed. That's when the loop is closed, when that feedback is given.
Just one thing before we end this segment. We've been talking about the role of the academics in this exercise of the whole quality assurance exercise, or quality evaluation, as I think you call it sometimes. What part do the students play in this exercise?
Well, I would say the students are the center in terms of the site visit of the review team. The review team meets with the undergraduate students, they meet with postgraduate students, and they also meet with recent graduates of the program. And when the students meet with the review team, no staff are present. For example, I do not sit in those meetings as I would in other meetings. The idea is to allow the students to feel as free as possible and as safe as possible, to be very candid and forthright in their comments, and they normally are. And the views of the students are reflected in the report of the review team. So those meetings with students are a central aspect of the review process in terms of a site visit. What we have been considering is that there may be a need, and this will be subject to discussion with colleagues on the campus, to even involve the students before the site visit in terms of, for example, having them participate in the preparation of the self-study report of the program. As happens in the case of accreditation, where students, their feedback is provided in a self-study report through surveys and that sort of thing.
Thank you very much for that. I think that was a good overview of what is involved in the quality assurance process. When we come back in our final segment, we will get outside of the specific institution, because there is a concern now for quality assurance measures in terms of what some people call cross-border education. And we will look a little bit at that.
Sure.
Moving away from the practice of quality assurance in particular institutions, in the literature and generally in practice, one hears about quality assurance in the context of providing education from one country to another country. And so there are terms like transnational education and cross-border education and so on. Now, one can see that, you know, the particular institutions involved in the different countries, you know, having this as a major issue, that they should find ways to look at quality assurance for that, or probably the governments. But it seems as though education is being treated in the context of a trade, of trading, and that is a bit far-fetched for some of us. Could you explain how that has come about?
It is quite far-fetched for many educators, and I think that's one of the reasons that UNESCO, for example, in its declaration after the World Conference on Higher Education in 1998, in its release, declared and really wanted to protect this concept of education as a public good, because the member states of the World Trade Organization, who sign agreements under the GATS, the General Agreement on Trade and Services, what that is setting up to do is actually privatize the provision of education. And many people are opposed to that. Because there's a recognition within the WTO, for example, and trading circles, that health and education are two of the potentially most profitable sectors. And I also think it's all part of globalization. And with the countries that agree to sign under the GATS, basically agree that they will allow one another to come into their countries and to be able to compete with national institutions to provide higher education privately, but in doing so, to also compete with national institutions for public funding, which has significant implications for the development of the education sector in most developing countries.
Yes, most of us would kind of balk at that. In fact, the way you were saying it there, most of us like to think of what you said about education being a public good. It is something that is a right, exactly. Some of us think, for everybody to have, and just like we have a right to water and clean air and so on. So isn't that, for us in small countries, isn't that to our detriment? I mean, how is that going to?
Well, I think the answer to that depends on whether you're a developing country or in inverted commas, a developed country. Because I think the proponents of GATS, for example, coming out of UK and Europe and North America, they see the GATS provisions as a means by which people of developing countries can have more access to private services in education and health, and in fact all the sectors. So that's why some people are concerned that the signing of GATS on a large scale among many countries could mean the end of the public sector because, and the role of government, because what it's doing is opening up public services to privatization, which is what government barriers prevent in a sense, so that the normal citizen can have access to a public service without having to pay a whole lot for it. So there are those who argue that the GATS will allow students to have access to a wider menu of higher education institutions and a wider menu of courses of good quality which cannot be provided nationally or locally. The opponents will argue, yes, that is the case, but you can have that access only if you can pay for it, if you can afford it. But on the other hand, those who oppose it will say, if we support government and respect the role of government and let government do what it's supposed to do, then you can protect national institutions and have the capacity and strengthen them to develop and to be able to offer higher education in terms of the kind of access that is demanded. So there are two views of the situation. Those who have the capacity to export higher education want it, and those who cannot compete with the providers of higher education from the more developed countries want to resist it.
It's an important debate. I don't think that there is a simple yes-no answer, but certainly one that anybody who is involved in education must put on the table for continued discussion to see, you know, we must continue talking about it. But coming back to the issue of quality assurance then, how does quality assurance fit in to this, you know, this new scenario?
Well, in fact, I think because of the impact of globalization on education and higher education, quality assurance has become even more important. Because for the receiving countries, we want to be sure that if particular institutions come in to our borders and are offering private higher education and we have to pay for it, then we want to be sure that our students will have access to the same quality higher education that students in England or United States or in Australia, well, not so much Australia for us, but certainly the UK and USA would have. Now, there is a fear that that is not always the case because foreign providers of higher education are in it not to develop our countries, they're in it for profit. And therefore, all the factors that inform any enterprise that is for profit will play. For example, one may expect that they may not have the same quality teaching staff in a developing country as they would have in the home country. They may not have the same quality of resources in terms of physical resources, for example, in the country where they're providing the cross-border education as they would in the home country. And it is for these kinds of reasons in terms of monitoring quality that certainly the role of an entity such as the National Accreditation Council becomes increasingly important, so that in ensuring that these foreign institutions are registered, they also can check that these institutions themselves have appropriate quality assurance mechanisms in the home country, and that those mechanisms are extended to the country where they are exporting the higher education.
So that makes it important, therefore, that in a country, there must be some kind of organization or systems in place to, on behalf of the country, to ensure that these quality assurance measures are in place. And I suppose the Accreditation Council of Trinidad and Tobago plays that role on behalf of Trinidad and Tobago.
Most certainly, that is a very important role. I don't think that Trinidad and Tobago has signed any major agreements under the GATS, as another Caribbean country might have. So, but the point is that we do have foreign providers coming in, even without the GATS, just in terms of international trade, you have other providers here. So the role of the Accreditation Council in ensuring that certainly the quality education is being provided by these institutions is a very important role.
We have been talking, and I suppose it's sort of natural, about providers of education from other countries and mainly countries in the north, and us in a small country on the receiving end. Is there any thinking of the reverse taking place?
Well, I don't know if there's any thinking in terms of any institution actually planning to go and export higher, it's from the Caribbean, exporting its own higher education services in another, let's say in a developed country, or even another developing country. But certainly there is a sense that there is a market for it. There is a market for it because there's a community out there, whether it's Caribbean or otherwise, that certainly has an attraction to things Caribbean, that certainly has an interest in Caribbean music and Caribbean food and Caribbean culture and Caribbean way of life, books, you name it. There's an interest there. And I would want to learn more about the Caribbean, the history of the Caribbean, the literature of the Caribbean, the films of the Caribbean. So I think it is a question of Caribbean higher education institutions organizing themselves to tap into that market in terms of developing and packaging educational programs for profit. But what it means is that we too have to have our quality assurance house in order. We cannot do that, we cannot begin to do that if we don't have particular systems in place to monitor the quality of curricula, to monitor and the delivery of curricula, the quality of teaching and learning, the quality of the infrastructure that we will be using to provide those educational experiences to learners. So the same requirements that we would have of foreign providers would be also expected of us if we were to begin to export our educational services. I think it's completely feasible. And hopefully in time it would happen.
Yeah. Small doesn't always have to be on the receiving end.
Exactly.
We have something to offer as
Yes.
well. Thank you very much, Dr. Gibb. This was a very interesting, informative and enlightening, and certainly a lot of food for thought and a lot of areas for debate. And so thank you for providing this, your thoughts as far as quality assurance goes for the postgraduate program of the Open Campus. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's been my pleasure.
This has been a discussion with Dr. Sandra Gift, who is Senior Program Officer for Quality Assurance at the St. Augustine campus of the University of the West Indies.